Good afternoon. Today you're cooking with Farrah and Jeanine, and for today's recipe we're going to be making an Italian vegetable soup, or better known as lentil soup. And we're going to use Jeanine's recipe for our procurement today. So for what we're going to need to start our soup is we're going to need a pot, we're going to need a soup spoon, measuring cups, half cup, a big cup for our bouillon. We're going to also need more cups and a half teaspoon, tablespoon, half a tablespoon, cutting board, and a knife for the recipe. The ingredients in the recipe is oil. You can choose your vegetables. We have chosen celery, carrots, onions, cabbage, spinach. Jeanine's going to explain why when she does her part. You also need to have garlic, lentils, bouillon, tomatoes. You're going to need basil and thyme, salt and pepper, oregano, and a little dash of lemon juice. So what we need to do is we need to take our oil, which is 2 tablespoons, pop it into the pot and heat that up. We're just going to turn it on between medium and high and turn our fan on low. Then we're going to add carrots and onions, and then we're going to saute those for 2 minutes. So we're just going to cut our carrots into little cubes.
The recipe calls for 1.5 cups of each of the vegetables. That works out to about 3 medium carrots. So Farrah's just cutting them and dicing them really. And she'll dice the onion, the celery, and the cabbage. So this vegetable soup actually is it's boasting with Italian flavors and lots of fresh vegetables. It actually tastes a lot like minestrone soup. Mm-hmm. However, it does have the addition of the protein-rich lentils. It's quite nutritious and it's loaded with great ingredients. It's really filling. It's super easy to make. And it tastes and feels so comforting on a cold winter day like today. So you can pair it with crackers, whole wheat bread, French bread, and then you'll have a complete meal. So it's wonderful, especially because of the addition of the lentils. So we're making the soup today on top of the stove, but it can easily be made in a slow cooker or a crock pot. It's a pretty versatile recipe, as Farrah mentioned at the beginning. We're using a variety of vegetables today, but you actually can add in any vegetables that you might have on hand. The actual recipe calls for zucchini. However, this time of year, zucchini is not readily available. And if you can find it, it's quite small and very, very pricey. So we've opted to add the cabbage and celery in place of the zucchini. I mean, you can use things like green beans, peas, cauliflower, broccoli. You can even add potatoes or sweet potatoes into the soup. So whatever you like, whatever you might have on hand in your pantry or your fridge, use it up so it doesn't go to waste for sure. You might also like to add some frozen vegetables into this soup. Just keep in mind that if you're using some frozen vegetables along with the fresh, make sure you add the frozen vegetables at the end of the cooking time because they do tend to get very soft and mushy, and you don't want them to cook as long as the regular soup.
So the onions are done. We're going to pop them in with the carrots, and we're going to saute these just for a couple of minutes. Probably about 2 minutes, I'd say.
You can almost tell when the onions, when the 2 minutes is up really, the onions start to get a bit translucent. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to add the broth and the lentils.
Yes.
As well as the spices.
I'm just going to move our tools because we have already measured out the ingredient measurements for the soup. Okay. So while the vegetables, the onions and carrots are sauteing in the oil, we're going to go ahead and cut up the celery and the cabbage. And Jeanine is going to get the tomatoes ready to add in.
So it calls for 1 can, 796 ml can. I'm using diced tomatoes today, but you can easily use whole tomatoes, stewed tomatoes, crushed tomatoes. I just happen to use diced for most of the recipes. So as you can see, it's really quite a simple soup. The longest part of the process is actually cutting the vegetables. But once they're cut, then once you add everything together, then you let the soup cook on low heat. So again, the recipe did not call for cabbage or celery. Some recipes for lentil vegetable soup do call for celery, and you often mix the onion, saute the onion, celery, and carrots together. But this one didn't call for the celery, but we're adding it with the cabbage in place of the zucchini. And again, it's a wonderful soup to just try to use up any of your leftover veggies that you have.
And you can cut your thickness of your vegetables to your liking. There's no right or wrong way. You can have thin, thick, chunky. It's whatever your preference is for cooking in your soups. The recipe calls for a cup and a half of each vegetable.
Each vegetable.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. And again, that is what the recipe calls for. But you know what? Feel free to, depending on how much soup you want to make. This makes quite a big pot of soup. Mm-hmm. There's 8 cups of broth in the soup, so it definitely is going to serve at least 8 people. Mm-hmm. So she's adding the cabbage and the celery's in there. The recipe does call for vegetable broth, and we're using low salt vegetable broth, but you can easily use chicken broth if you didn't have any vegetable broth, or even beef broth, really. That would add some richness to the tomato-based soup. So you can add the 8 cups of broth.
So that equals about 2
of the containers of broth.
Yeah.
4 cups in one container.
Oh. We're going to turn this up to boil, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of the garlic.
And we have our garlic in.
And the can of tomatoes.
And in goes our diced tomatoes. The diced tomatoes I find add a nice thickness to the soup itself.
And 1 1/4 cup of green lentils. We'll add the spices. Yep. So we have 1.5 teaspoons of basil. We have 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of thyme, and we have salt and pepper to taste. We've put about a teaspoon of each in there. As I said, we've used low sodium broth, so you need some salt, just a little bit of salt in the soup.
And then we're going to cover that and let it boil.
So this recipe calls for green lentils. However, you can use red lentils in the soup. However, you have to adjust the cooking time. So red lentils take about half the cooking time of green lentils. So you wouldn't add them with the vegetables. You'd wait till about half the cooking time was complete, and then you'd add in the red lentils. Green and red lentils are both nutritious. They're high in protein, fiber, iron, and other minerals, but they do actually behave differently in the kitchen. So red lentils are, when you buy them, they're usually split, and they're without skins. Green lentils, on the other hand, are usually sold with skins on. And green lentils have a denser cell wall. So in any recipe you're using green lentils, they actually stay whole and firm. Whereas red lentils cook faster, they soften, and they often become mushy in recipes. So the green lentils, as I said, they take longer to cook, but they stay firm and they hold their shape. So when you look at the soup at the end, when it's done, you will actually see the lentils and you'll feel the bite. So the red lentils are often best used maybe in purees or sauces. If you're making like a lentil bolognese, like a spaghetti sauce, where you want the lentils to become mushy, the red lentils would be a better choice there. And they often are used as a thickening agent, the red lentils. Green lentils, however, are used in a dish where you want them to be visible. You want them to be firm. So maybe salads, soups, where you want them to be separate with some bite. And you'll see that in this soup at the end. The lentils in this recipe offer a really nice plant-based protein option. They provide actually about 15 to 18 grams of protein per cup, and that supports our muscle and tissue repair. Plant-based proteins such as lentils or beans or nuts or seeds really offer a less costly alternative to animal proteins. I don't know if you've seen the news recently, but the cost of beef has actually increased by about 30% since last year. So if you can choose alternatives like plant-based proteins, it's probably a smart choice. You're still getting the protein, and it's still good for you, but it's not you're not using meat. The lentils and the vegetables in this soup provide a nice mix of nutrients, including fiber. And fiber actually allows you to have a happy, healthy gut. It also regulates your blood sugar, and it helps lower cholesterol. The other thing about fiber is that when you eat foods that are high in fiber, you feel full faster, so you tend to eat less, so it helps with weight management. Vegetables in this soup are like vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, some of the other minerals. They're wonderful for your bone health, immune function, and they certainly promote healthy skin and growth. So you can see the last ingredient, the last vegetable that we're going to add is a leafy green, and we've used baby spinach today. The recipe calls for spinach or kale. Mm-hmm. We've decided to use baby spinach today because it has a milder, slightly earthy taste compared to kale, which tends to be more bitter or peppery. And the earthy taste of the spinach matches the green lentils very, very well. So it gives some warmth to the soup. But you can use either leafy green because they both complement each other in terms of nutritionally, and they work well in different kinds of recipes. For those of you who might like to add some additional protein to the soup, because it is vegetarian, at the end, when you're serving it, you can always toss some cheese on top. Or during the cooking process, you can add maybe some grated chicken or turkey or cubed turkey or chicken, or maybe a lean cut of beef. But it's such a wonderful filling soup without any animal protein in it that you probably won't even miss the meat.
I agree.
There you go. At the very end of the soup, when we finish it and before you serve it, we add actually a splash of lemon juice. And some might think that this seems quite funny, but it's a little bit of acid. And what the acid does, it balances the earthy richness of the lentils and vegetables. As I say, it wakes up all the nutrients. Yeah. And it just helps with the flavor overall. So we will add the dash of lemon juice at the end, and you'll see that it's a wonderful filling meal. It can be frozen, it reheats really well, and it makes a large pot of soup. So it's just a wonderful option for families and it ties in well with our cooking on a shoestring budget programs.
Now that we've had our soup boiling away for about 30 minutes, we've turned our heat down to about medium heat, and we're going to add our spinach and cook it for another 10 minutes. Once that has cooked for 10 minutes, we're going to add our splash of lemon juice. Now that we've cooked our spinach for the last 10 minutes, this is what we've boiled down to. A beautiful Italian vegetable or lentil soup.